some background on those issues, and then also the militarized response to these issues. I first want to introduce and welcome Lorenzo Serna, Director of Tactical Media at Indian Collective. Lorenzo is a Chicanx queer media maker who has been on the front lines of multiple international movements. And Lorenzo is a co-founder of Unicorn Riot, shout out to Unicorn Riot, where they formerly spent over 5 years of their professional media career. Lorenzo organizes process and media assets as they deploy into conflict zones. From the streets of New York City to the rural plains of Standing Rock, Lorenzo has created internationally recognized media despite being shot at with rubber bullets, doused in pepper spray, and clouded with tear gas. Their focus is decolonizing media and pushing oral storytelling in live video. Lorenzo holds a Master of Arts with a focus in creative writing and a bachelor's degree in English from the University of North Dakota. And if anyone has questions during our presentation, feel free to put those in the chat or also in the comments on Facebook and YouTube, and we will try and get to those at the end of the presentations. So I want to welcome Lorenzo. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, it's like, wow, all that stuff I guess is true. Again, my name is Lorenzo Serna. I'm Chicanx. I want to first just acknowledge all of my ancestors and people who fought and sometimes died, but also thrived and survived to put me here before you all. Like I am not here by chance. I'm here through the lot of work of a lot of other people who helped me do anything that I've really accomplished. So I want to make sure that I mention that and start with that and acknowledge my ancestors and everything they did for me. And before going into this conversation about militarized police and I guess the perception of that at Standing Rock, or how that was sort of deployed at Standing Rock, one of the things I always had trouble with early on in a lot of this work is there was this movement to stop the militarization of police. But when you're on the front lines of movements, it's like, what are you trying to stop? Because they're rolling through the lines with tanks, you know, they have armored personnel vehicles, they have AR-15s, full armor, they have snipers, you know, so it's like, it seemed during that movement to stop the police militarization, they had already militarized. And we're you know, so going to Standing Rock, I think it was really clear. And so I wanted to kind of begin this presentation with like this 2-minute video clip of the incident commander, sheriff, his name is Paul Laney, from, I think it was Morton County, talking about how they perceive their sort of like policing of the water protectors in that camp. It's about 2 minutes long, and I think it's sort of, it gives a good idea of what folks were dealing with when it comes to the law enforcement elements that were there. And then we'll talk and unpack all the elements that were there, including, you know, the corporate, it was like state, corporate, federal, like all of these different groups were policing in tandem together and in conversation together. And a lot of documents came out that shows this. And we, if you want to go look at, there's a documentary I helped co-produce when I was at UR called Black Snake Killers, a No Dapple story. And it sort of gives you a timeline of sort of all of this. And so if you have time, it's 2 hours long, but it's a lot of information. So let's watch this real quick, and then I'll just kind of get back, chat for a little bit. And then if there's questions, I'd love to answer them. So let's see if I do this right. I'm going to share my screen. Show sound, this one.
We were North Dakota nice. We always took the high road on everything because that's what we do. Well, you know, my mom taught me very early at a young age, if I'm cold in the water, come out of the damn water. You had what we call the eco-terrorist groups out of the Pacific Northwest who very much wanted direct action, very much wanted confrontation, very much were looking for a fight. You had some of the AIM group out of South Dakota, the Oglala Red Warrior group. They were going to get the bridge back, because if you could get the bridge back, you could get direct access to where the pipeline was coming across. They could get direct access to the drill pad, and on each side of that river were two $20 million drills, which if they could destroy them, they certainly could slow down the pipeline, and that was what they intended to do. You know, the peaceful and prayerful group, if they had been able to maintain and manage this entire thing, we never would have had to leave the borders of Cass County and all the other jurisdictions that we had to come from, because it would have been peaceful and prayerful. Start identifying the major players and start tracking their Facebook pages. Reach out to all the other law enforcement entities now, because you're going to need their help. And we had, at one point, 400 cops. We had 10 different states here in North Dakota helping us with this. There are definitely areas we know of, in South Dakota, Nebraska, and Minnesota, that this is all pending. And have your emergency declarations ready to go, because when they start kicking off, this is going to go fast. And reach out to your National Guard now. They were a godsend for us. They initially took a support role, but by the end, when it got so confrontational, the citizens of the Bismarck-Mandan area were screaming for the Guard to intervene. And we all understood the optic of the Guard in place against American citizens, the Guard in place against Native Americans. But at some point, we finally needed their direct support. We were literally fighting a war, and every day we were in fear for the lives of our people because we didn't know what was going to happen.
Leaked Tiger Swan documents verified that paramilitary forces protecting the pipeline used counterinsurgency tactics to combat protests and treated water protectors as a jihadist insurgency.
All right, fun. Anyways, so in there, the sheriff literally says that they were at war. I thought that was pretty telling. Like, everyone heard that. I'm just looking for acknowledgement that the audio worked. Yeah, so that's Paul Laney, right? And that's him doing presentations, including in Minnesota, right? So he went and toured all these different sheriff's associations and had this presentation where he explained to them how to defeat what they considered, what they portrayed as like this insurgency that was super militant and attached it to this idea of jihadism. And this is in the United States. These are indigenous people. These are, be it U.S. citizens or not, like they're from these lands. And this is sort of how those police were talking about them in their meetings, right? That's in their little like meeting at home when they're having coffee, getting ready to go to work. They're like, we gotta go fight the jihadists. We're at war with them. Let's go do that. That's how they're framing it. And those documents, they come from Tiger Swan. Tiger Swan was created by Prince's name, Betsy DeFos's brother, Eric Prince, right? And so he created Blackwater. It turned into Tiger Swan, from my understanding. Tiger Swan went and did work where? In the Middle East, against what? Or for what? To protect oil assets in the Middle East, right? And they brought that company in to the United States, right? And so in those documents we saw too, you saw that there was a narrative work being created by them, right? Like the Tiger Swan never really face any repercussions from their work in North Dakota. But what they were doing was basically counterintelligence, counter-narrative work, and sort of informing the police how to structure their things they're doing in a way to gain public sympathy and to take sympathy away from the people of the land, which again is literally what happened in Vietnam, right? When you send in these special forces, they're there to work with the locals to try to create counterinsurgency. But now they were doing it here in the United States, in the plains of North Dakota, against indigenous people who are from always have been there. And that, so that to me, that was what was going on. And that to them, that was what was going on. They wrote it down, so. The other thing too, I think it's important to note, and when I talk about what's allowed, how they allow this to happen, and of course, none of us want this to happen, but there's a lot of narrative construction work to do it, right? And so in North Dakota, the way I saw that play out, and again, I had to give a little background, I've been really interested in how the police police the people for a long time, because I've been policed by the police a lot, and I didn't like it. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to keep studying you all and pointing out how messed up this is. And so I've been doing it since 2007 or so. So I've been around a lot of police lines, a lot of police mass mobilizations where they had to control them in their minds. And so here, so you see what kind of happened, this playbook that happened here happened around national special security events, like the RNC, Republican National Convention, and DNC. And they started to create things to create a them and us sort of mentality on the ground. And I think this was really pervasive when they created, I think I have a video of it, but they created here we go. Let's watch this. This is fun. So they created what they called an information checkpoint that they staffed with National Guards folks, right? And so eventually they create a physical barrier between where the protests were occurring and then where Mandan was, where the cities the citizens were. And they're like, everything down there is bad and maybe criminal. You should be warned before you go there. And we're going to do this 24 hours a day. They said it was an information checkpoint, but also they shut it down at times. They wouldn't let people through at times. And this was operated by the National Guard. So, You can see here a National Guards person, and he's just like, "What's up?"
Ongoing protest against the
I'm
pipeline.
protecting the people, I guess.
Are you going
South.
south?
I have the right to remain silent.
Okay, well, we're not letting any people go south, so if you want to go that way, you'll have to take a right.
Can I ask why?
I don't have an answer for that.
And can I ask you why you guys are out here doing
Get
a
it.
checkpoint with no warning signs?
And so, so the National Guard's now there, right? So it starts with the police. The police show up. If we go back, you can see the police show up, and there's kind of like, look at us. We're just in our normal uniforms. Like we're not militarized. We're just hanging out. We're here because there's protests, and we don't have all this gear. It's also important to know that at this point they were not aware this was going to occur. This is like 3 days into everything going on. If you go forward, this is like a month in of how they showed up.
Are trying to clear these people. You see,
There you go.
police officer, the
It's an
automatic
MRAP
weapons
mine-resistant
vehicles.
vehicle in case there's mines, I guess. And then another lightly armored vehicle.
There's people
And they're
are
rolling
rolling the
in,
vehicles
fully
for the
armored. They
police
had
now.
snipers posted on hills. They also had a
So,
Predator
this is
drone that
happening.
was
The
going over the
bulldozers are
camp,
laying out more
which seems
railroad
pretty
ties.
militarized to me. I don't know if I can find the document that shows that somewhere in here. I did pull it out, but it's in a big mess. And so, like, these things aren't, like, they're not hard to see. Look. Like this is the plains of North Dakota. You have mine-resistant vehicles. You have people full of armor. You have people with semi-automatic weapons and snipers posted. You have a Predator rolling around overhead. But I think the most, so it's like how do you talk about it besides it being military? Like it's already militarized. Like there's like I remember sitting there and you're looking up. I'm like, you think that's the Predator drone? There's like this dot right in the sky. This really, this circling us forever. I think it's interesting too where we're at, and I'm excited for the further conversation too as we talk about that to where we're at right now, because there's a lot of corollaries, and also talking about how that sheriff was here talking to the sheriffs up north of how to police those folks and how to police whatever way happened, and they're using the playbook they designed over here and the mentality they carried over here, right? And so that mentality is like militarized. They're enemies. They're the opposition. They're the forces we have to destroy, right? That's how they're talking about these things in their documents. Let me think if there's anything else. Yeah, so another thing too, and I have it here too. There's like so we have the narrative, like the work that Roadblock did, right? That work that Roadblock did was super important because like I guess they created the either or opposition. They created a border, which this country loves borders, and was able to like use narrative work to say what those people were doing. And the way they did that was really simple. It's like they just had like press conferences. Like here, this is a really early press conference. And I think it's actually narrated over, but we'll just listen to it because it's, it is what it is. Oh, geez. I'm worried the sound's not going to work.
Held a press conference where he labeled all the hundreds of water protectors criminals. He cited reports of gunfire in the area and pipe bombs being made within the ever-expanding water protector camps, yet provided no evidence. Kirchmeier used the information to announce a checkpoint south of Mandan,
Yeah, I think that
separating the
was
people of Morton County from the ongoing protest against the pipeline.
The blockades or whatever. But yeah, so he would the sheriff would go up there and they never found pipe bombs, by the way. They never found guns in the camp. They never found any of the things that he says was going on down there, but they just kept saying it, right? And that's the importance, is like the ability to keep saying it. And since they're the police, usually they get a giant platform. That's why I became a journalist. That's why a lot of people come to journalists, is like the police always get the best platform, because they literally can be like, hey, this is what happened. And everyone's like, oh yeah, what happened? And so they use that really to their advantage. Another thing I think is interesting is like a reporter who was on the ground there, like we had a lot of conversations about what were we doing? Like, is this conflict reporting? Like, are we reporting from a war zone? Like we're having conversations about getting body armor and being worried of being like shot by like these forces that are going to come in and clear this camp, and trying to figure out how to report from that safely. And there was no safe way to report from it. There was no safe way provided. There was no way for the press to really report what was going on without risking arrest, risking bodily harm. And my example of that would be like, I think on the 22nd, there was a big prayer walk, right? I'm a journalist. I'm filming. We're in the middle of North Dakota. There's planes everywhere. It's like nobody's around, right? So like they're heading that way. and I am going to cover them because they're heading that way. It's like my job to like show what's going on. Anyway, so I followed the prayer walk. Eventually I was kettled and arrested. I was arrested as well as, you know, as a journalist. I was sent to jail, and I actually ran into Sheriff Kirschmeyer, which was the person doing the press conference. And I asked him, I was like, look, like I'm a journalist, like it's my job to report what's going on here, and I'm trying to do that safely. And it's necessary. Like what is happening is an international event that people want to know information about. I'm reporting from it. Like this is my, you know, my job. And he's like, well, there's a safe way to do it. You got to talk to my officers. Let's talk to my officers and they'll tell you where you can report from. And I was like, well, I did. It's like, I literally the day before I've always talked to your officers. I said, where we know there's a protest going on. We'd like to know where we can go, where we can report from. And they're like, you got to go around. And then when you went around, there's another officer who tells you, you got to go around, you know, and you're just stuck in this loop. And so I was like, well, how, knowing that this is an international event, knowing that people want to know about this, how do we as journalists report on it? And he's just like, oh, there's a right way. There's a right way. And he was like, ran off, you know? And so that obviously isn't anything they're interested in, to allow access to like journalists or outside point of view of what's going on. And I think that we see that play out a little bit today. Or we always see it. Let me just check. All right. Well, I don't know. I hope that was somewhat helpful and answered some of the questions that people had around the Standing Rock and the militarization of police there. It was very clear. Like I said, it's well documented. I implore you, if you are interested, to go watch that documentary. It's a timeline of watching the police militarize, or at least their forward-facing forces get armored and equipped with militarized vehicles. And then the last thing I'll say is all those vehicles came from oil wars, right? Like they're from the Pentagon agreement. The police department is literally getting equipment and training that came from the oil wars in the Middle East, and now they're having those wars here in the plains or in the forests, and they try to get these fossil fuel infrastructures in, and the people are saying no, you know, we're not interested in this. So it's just important to know that that's how, like what they did in the Middle East and Vietnam, all that stuff is just happening in our backyard, happening up north. And it's a lot of, yes, forward-facing militarized force, but also like counterintelligence narrative work that they're just funneling tons of money in order to create the situation where they can come in with the hammers they always want to come in with. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time. Again, I'm Lorenzo Sarna. Thank you for listening to me and giving me this opportunity to speak. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. That was really informative. I would ask if there are any, Kristin or Sophia, if you've got any people who had any questions for Lorenzo. You can also put them in the chat if you are joining us on Zoom. I want to remind people we're also streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. And if you are on Facebook, you can, Facebook, you can share this with the share button to your friends and the wider community as well. Anyone? Will someone be able to put in the chat or for later the documentary that Lorenzo is talking about? I also want to tell people, and I'll say this at the end, on the Women Against Military Madness webpage under End Domestic Militarism, we have a nice sheet of some resources and references, and we will make sure to add this video to that reference sheet as well. Okay. Great. Wonderful presentation. We've had some great comments on your presentation, Lorenzo. Thank you very much.
We've got some questions. If you can see them in the doc, you have them available? I'm having trouble hearing Diane.
Actually, don't. No questions yet. I just have. Thanks.
Oh, I have some questions on there, so I can put them in the chat for you to see.
Or you can ask them.
Totally. Lorenzo, first question is, what problems does Unicorn Riot face today?
I'm not part of the organization, so I'm not going to have any comment with them. I left them in January. So.
That sounds good. How can we support your work?
I mean, I would just support Indigenous media makers. I would also support Indigenous media makers as much as you can, or Indigenous and independent media makers as much as you can as well. And supporting my work. I work at the NDN Collective. I follow them on Facebook, Twitter, Twitter, YouTube, sort of like the gamut or whatever. But in the end, I would say like, yeah, support my work, but I would suggest supporting the work of the independent journalists who are in your area and who are always showing up, and stop supporting the work of people who just show up when it gets really tense, because those are all sort of like tourists and parachute journalists. And so like most people have people who show up to every one of their events, cover every one of their events, and those people are the ones they should be supporting, because they're literally the people who are getting the information out for you. And I would just really implore people to look around at who those people are and who you want to support, and just toss them money. And sort of like all these big orgs, I don't, if you feel like it, go ahead. But the independent people, like, it goes so much further. That's what I'd say.
Absolutely. And then some people are just wondering specifically how they can follow you, if you have handles.
Oh, you can follow me. I have like a Facebook page and stuff. I'm Unedited Camera. I'm like really bad at my own personal social media because I sort of hate it. And if anyone wants to know, like, I'm over social media. I just want to like go sit by a river and like wish the world wasn't burning. But anyways, Unedited Camera. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the things. And occasionally you'll see me cooking some food, and occasionally most of my work goes to the Indian Collective. And then on my personal page, you'll see a lot of testing stuff where I'll like test different gear and things like that. So, but yeah, Lorenzo Serna or Unedited Camera.
Awesome. Those are the questions I have right now.
I'd like to move on if we can, because I'm also the timekeeper. I also want to welcome Joan Allen, who will also be talking about Standing Rock. She's been an active WAMM board member for 3 years since moving from Bismarck, North Dakota, where she witnessed the destruction of the environment by big oil companies and the complicity of state government and media that let oil companies and control the media, which we heard Lorenzo speak about, all of which led to the military type assault on the water protectors at Standing Rock. Joan became involved with grassroots groups in North Dakota and stood in solidarity with those impacted by the oil industry. Welcome, Joan.
That was a wonderful presentation, Lorenzo. I'll give a perspective of somebody living in Bismarck at the time. I moved to Bismarck about 2010, which was the beginning of the oil boom. And it was very obvious that the big oil controlled everything. They put their own politicians in, they backed anybody that would support them. And so essentially they controlled the media, they controlled state government, and they controlled the state legislation. And we got very little information through the media on the oil spills that were going on in the Bakken, the deaths on the rigs, and the environmental issues. And the oil companies would use fly-by-night subcontractors to avoid any liability. For example, when they were taking the toxic chemicals from the fracking site, they would subcontract with these fly-by-night operators who would, instead of taking it to a toxic dump site, they would go in the middle of the night and dump it in some farmer's stock pond. So that was a regular occurrence. Also, the radioactive socks that they used for fracking, they found them all in an abandoned gas station. So there was all kinds of things going on, but that was never really publicized. And when Standing Rock started, the big lie was that the tribe had given them permission to cross down at Standing Rock, which was not true. And the tribal chairman released a audio of their meeting where they said explicitly that they were not letting them cross there. And they always referred to the water protectors as terrorists anytime they were mentioned in the news or in the paper. And there was a strong military presence. A friend of mine went to Amy Goodman's hearing in Morton County, and she said there were about 5 Native women standing outside the courthouse, and all of a sudden armored tanks are coming down the street at them. You know, and so there was constant harassment, strip searches going through that checkpoint. They even strip searched the tribal chairman who in the past had opened the legislative session. So there was constant harassment. And at one point, they put a public service announcement on all cell phones in the Bismarck-Mandan area where they said that terrorists were coming into the area and to beware. And they would close off certain streets, like on one side of the post office, so that we couldn't have access to that door. And it was ridiculous. I mean, there was nothing going on, but they just always riled up the local population and made everybody afraid. And at one point, we had a vigil that we used to meet on the corner, a Standing with Standing Rock, and we were literally always afraid that somebody was going to jump the curb at us. They'd rev their engines and turn in like they're going to come at us, and every other truck flipped us off. You know, there was just such hostility. And they would report that they were starting fires down there, and it was really these provocateurs hired by the oil company that were starting these fires, but they just turned everybody against them. And if anybody has any questions, it was really a sad time living in Bismarck because you could see what was happening. And when natives would come into the community, I mean, they would be harassed. And there was one church that would take donations down to them, food and clothing and things. And when they, when they would take things down to them, they were saying that other churches, as soon as somebody would express any support of Standing Rock, you know, the congregation would get up and walk out. So it was really an uphill battle for them. And then the only real publicity that they gave of them down there was after they left in the middle of a killer blizzard. And in North Dakota, those blizzards, it gets down to like 30 below with a 50-mile-an-hour wind. And so they had to leave suddenly. And then they had a front page spread on the Bismarck Tribune that this was like an environmental disaster that they created. You know, it was just their tents that they had to leave behind because they had to leave so quickly. So they really did a number on the people in Bismarck and in Mandan, just to create this constant state of fear. So it was good to finally move out of there. And I really, you know, North Dakota, I'm from Western North Dakota initially, and it was so beautiful. And they've just completely destroyed the environment out there. So it was really sad to see. If anybody has any questions. So I can't hear you.
Oh,
Well, Joan, I was just this is Lorenzo. I was just gonna say like thanks for that perspective because that's what it felt like. But I was like, on the other side, I wasn't living in the city, but I was like, God, they're doing so much work, so much work to create. And I mean, did you? I guess my question is like, did you feel like they were trying to create like communities around like these ideas of them being terrorists and these ideas of them being criminals and trying to create like sort of language for people to use together? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, and they were constantly making people feel like they were under attack, and they weren't. I mean, there was nothing going on. So, it was really unfortunate to see how the oil companies could control the narrative, which they did from the very beginning. And people I think North Dakota people are basically kind of trusting. And they would say, well, if the government tells us that, it's got to be true. So there was no counter narrative that was there.
One question here from Kim. How are people's perceptions of the Native peoples and lands now? And if either of you can answer that briefly. Again, how are the people's perceptions of the Native peoples and lands now?
Well, I moved in 2017, so I haven't been back there, but it still is, we used to be a blue state. We had a good governor and legislators, and now it's a total red state. So I think there still is a lot of that. And from what I'm hearing from back there, they are still supportive of the oil companies. And
Yeah, I would just say we still live in a white supremacist society that has to be destroyed, and we haven't done that yet. And so the process of continual elimination against people of color, Indigenous people, by the institutions in place was continuous. It's been ongoing, and I wouldn't say it's changed in any. And I think Indigenous people have fought for visibility and done a lot of work for themselves to become, more seen in the public, but that was their work that they have to do because of the society we live in, and so I would say like nothing has changed, and the things that Indigenous people have to deal with is always unfortunate because we are trying to live our dreams, we are trying to, raise our families, but then we're forced to have to deal with pipelines that are destroying our territory. Or in one instance, I would say like in Minnesota, I don't know if people remember, there was like the artist who made the gallows of the 38+2, and there was this all these Indigenous people had to come and they protested it because it was wrong. But at the same time that was going on, Indigenous people had organized like a theater of Indigenous stories, and all those people had to stop their theater work to go deal with the fact that they're once again having this thrown in their face, and they weren't, all the people they wanted to go there had to go protest, and so like that's my biggest, I don't know if that makes sense, but I just wanted to say that like we're all trying to make our lives, we're all trying to live, but we have to like deal with this society that constantly obstructs our abilities. And yeah, that's it. Check.
I have about 2 minutes, and I'm just going to ask one last question. Do you see any hope for change with the new Secretary of Interior? Deb Haaland from New Mexico.
Well, I do, because we'll have a Native perspective, and that was totally missing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that change happened. It's like a very visceral change that we can all see and acknowledge and feel. And so that's positive. But I have very little faith in the system as a whole. And I know that that's what they're dealing with. Like you can. I think identity is really important, but like also identity, like, there's still capitalist queer people who are trying to destroy my life, And so it's like, I'm really excited, of course, to have the representation that was historic. It was a lot of work from Indigenous people made that happen, made this last election happen. And so I'm really proud and thankful for all those people and for to see this change happen. But I still carry forward that question of this whole system that I know is going to be forcing them into positions to make decisions that they probably wouldn't have made, but they may have no choice. And so I'm aware of that, but I am very thankful and I'm excited. I got to hear Deb Haaland speak to us after accepting, and it was just amazing. Like the biggest difference for me was like she talked to us as Indigenous group and she was like just had taken the oath, and she was making dinner with her family, and she took time with her family to like talk to us, and that felt, I don't know, I don't even know how to explain. That felt like the most authentic thing ever. You know, I was like, oh my God, like we did get somebody in there who sees us and sees each other. You know, and I think that's what we want. So check.
Thank you both for your perspectives. We're going to move on to line 3, and I'm excited to present Allison Doe Hoyer. I actually heard Doe speak at a Surge presentation, and I really liked your putting into perspective and some information about line 3, which some of us want more background, more information on it. So I found that very helpful. Brief introduction. Doe is a white settler living on occupied Dakota homelands, a student of United Theological Seminary and the Cultural Wellness Center, and a climate justice organizer with Min 350 and Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. They are also a song leader and have developed the ritual soup singing as a way to more deeply organize communities around issues of justice, land rematriation, wealth redistribution, and social change. So thanks for sharing with us today, Doe.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel really honored to be here. And I guess just to add to that introduction, I want to locate myself within my own ancestry as well, because I think that really informs why I feel called to show up to Line 3 Resistance. So what I know of my ancestors, I have German and Scottish lineages. So my German ancestors settled in Morris, Minnesota, shortly following the forced removal of Dakota people from their homelands by the US government. And I don't know too much about their story of why they settled in Morris, but very much a part of that legacy of removing Indigenous peoples from their land to make way for settlement of, white communities. And also just what I'm learning about the Scottish lineages too is the clearances of the highlands. So just wanting to make the connection between some of the things that happened to Indigenous people in Europe that removed them forcibly from their homelands and then relocated them into what is now Canada or the United States and Turtle Island. And so I say all that just to encourage, anyone from a social location of whiteness to really look into your ancestry and, why your people came here, because there's lots of connections of what happened in Europe and what's happening to Indigenous people here. And I think it fortifies our desire to show up in solidarity if we can really make those connections with our own people too. So with that, actually I want to say one more thing, because I am a seminary student. I'm at a Christian seminary, and I also come from a lineage of Christian ministers, which means that my ancestors are further implicated in the enacted genocide on Indigenous peoples. And we talk a lot about the state, and of course the military and the police being an extension of the state and the colonial government, but the church also played a very significant role and really collaborated with the state on this attempted cultural genocide. And so I want to name that as well, that I am reckoning with my Christian ancestors and the part that they played. And that is a big part of what has drawn me to seminary, is to really reckon with that history. And so all of that is informing me showing up today with information about Line 3, which is an Indigenous led movement, right? It's being led by Anishinaabe women and Two-Spirit people on the front lines in northern Minnesota. So the things that I'm sharing with you are things that I have learned from listening to Tara Haugasag, Tanya Albid, Winona LaDuke, Taisha Martineau, Don Goodwin, Deborah Topping. So those are just some names I want to throw out there in terms of leaders to be listening to be learning this information as well. And I'm going to share a slide now, just as I speak. These are kind of the ways to be getting involved. And I'm going to put this up here for a while, just in case this is something you want to screenshot or take a picture of. But just some ways to be getting involved. I'm going to take a breath for a moment. One of the things I wanted to kind of emphasize first is some of the bigger picture of line 3. So there's a lot of things very specific to, so-called Minnesota or Anishinaabe Treaty Territory, but there's also these much bigger kind of global implications of line 3. And I wanted to kind of start there. So line 3 represents an extension of the tar sands industry. Basically, for the next 30 years, it would continue this highly extractive and very intensive process of oil extraction. This is positioned within our sort of decade that we have to turn around. I mean, any attempts to reduce carbon emissions and maintain any semblance of like stable climate is within this 10-year period. So the fact that this permitting has gone through and construction has started it's nonsensical based on what we need to do as a global society.
You get me when it's done.
And then
I'll take you over to me. You have to stop at the pharmacy.
the other thing I want to say is so line 3 is proposed to move something like 800,000 barrels of tar sands oil a day. That has the carbon footprint equivalent of running 50 coal-fired power plants a day. So again, you can't say that you want to be reducing carbon emissions and then approve a pipeline that has this impact. You have to be consistent across what you're doing. And when I say you, I'm kind of naming the executive powers like President Joe Biden or Minnesota Governor Walz, who do have the ability, the power to revoke some of these permits and really challenge these decisions. However, we're not seeing that yet. So the other thing I want to name is the proposed route is intended to cross the Mississippi rivers twice near the headwaters, and something like 62 million people living downstream of this pipeline drink with this water, wash with this water, cook with this water. So it really does endanger, millions of people beyond just Minnesota. And then, the tar sands in general, I'm going to show some pictures a little bit later in the presentation, but all Indigenous communities around the tar sands, for years have been so impacted by this just highly destructive extractive industry. And in addition to the ways that the earth is violated, there's strong correlations with how Indigenous women are also violated. So when these pipelines are built, many out-of-state male workers get brought in, and there's demonstrated correlation with an increase in human trafficking and sex trafficking of Native women. So the ways that these pipelines really assault Native communities are so many. I would just want to name that too. And I think the other kind of big picture thing that I wanted to make sure I touched on is that all of this is structural racism, right? So the regulatory process was something like a 7-year process in which the Minnesota government in particular really refused to look at treaty agreements and honor them in their decisions, right? They really wanted, they have said directly to Indigenous leaders, Governor Walz, like, oh, trust the process. But how can you trust a process that is steeped in structural racism? How can you trust a process that, when these pipelines were first built, Native tribal nations didn't necessarily have the same political power to fight any of these. So it's like the line itself was never consensual, and then this replacement line is also, has such strong opposition from White Earth Nation and Red Lake Nation, as well as multiple environmental groups. So all of it is just really boils my blood to think about all these things and to really learn about all these things. This map is, I think, really helpful just for seeing the impact on treaty resources that from this pipeline. So this is a map from Honor the Earth. The black line is the existing line 3. And so you can see it goes through the Leech Lake and Fond du Lac reservation. And the proposed replacement, again, it's not a replacement. Enbridge wants to call it that, but it is an entirely new corridor that's going through, pristine treaty lands in the 1855 treaty territory. But you can see it doesn't go through reservation land. And that was intentional. So when Enbridge says that they have been kind of collaborating with Native tribes and governments, that is not all tribes and governments. Obviously some of these nations were directly impacted by the existing line. And so their refusal, so like Leech Lake's refusal to have the new line go through their reservation is in part kind of why this new path is there. So this, it's very divisive tactics that they're using kind of over and over again. I think the other thing I want to point out here is all of the wild rice lakes that are near this new pipeline corridor. Wild rice is a sacred food for Anishinaabe people. It's a sacred medicine. And you can see on this map how many, all waters are connected too. So any spill that happens in a rural area is likely to just severely impact these ecosystems and impacting culture and way of life for Native harvesters. And this is really serious. And the Walz administration acts like, I don't know, like it again really just makes me very upset to know that there is like this complete lack of being able to hear from Indigenous people of culture and realize the significance of wild rice, Minoman. Gonna move on, I think. So this kind of shows the different treaty territories. So most of the construction is happening within the 1855 treaty territory. And, we're all, one of the things I've heard many times is, we're all treaty people. And that means that even as white settlers, like we have a responsibility on our end to really pressure the US government to honor these agreements. And I think that's something I just want to really advocate for my social location, is that the government is, we know all these connections with government and oil and military, and it really is going to take many more people really saying, no, these are agreements that you need to honor. These are supreme law of the land, like federal agreements. And these really, need to be honored. And one thing I'll say too, just on this, is that this past week, the opening arguments for the case in the Court of Appeals were heard. And because it's in Minnesota, and knowing that Minnesota government has really failed to honor treaty agreements, the strongest argument that they're moving forward with is the Public Utilities Commission failure to really, okay, I'm gonna back up for a second. Enbridge is required to supply evidence of demand for this oil, which they have not. Actually, you'll see if you look at forecasts, there's much information to indicate that the tar sands is actually in decline, like that forecast of demand. So what they submitted to the Public Utilities Commission was a forecast of supply, as in anything, what they are capable of extracting without any foreseeable end from the Alberta tar sands. That is not the same as demand for oil. So there is actually this oil is not for consumption in the Midwest. And if anything, Minnesota is just a pathway so that Enbridge can export this oil internationally. And so that's the primary basis of argument in the Court of Appeals, is over the PUC accepting the supply forecast as a demand forecast when they're actually very different things. And so the treaty arguments are going to be seen more in the federal court level, because that's where they will have a little bit more weight and standing. So I just want to say that as well. I wanted to post this picture because this is a recent action this week as well. So this is, I think 27 water protectors were arrested on Thursday. And this is a traditional Anishinaabe prayer lodge that was blockading construction site. And allies locked around Indigenous folks in ceremony. And this image really stands with me because, you know, it's so much of this fight is really spiritual, and the opposition wants to make it political or economic, but it's really, you know, water is foundational to all of life on this planet. And so this image really anchors in me the spirituality of this fight, and seeing allies, you know, really using their bodies to protect that, to protect prayer and ceremony is just something really beautiful. And I hope more of us can really step up to that because it's needed, right? Construction is about 50% done. Enbridge is working 24/7. So they talk this talk about safety, but I don't understand how it's safe to you know, plow forward with construction in this really, yeah, just fast and obscene way. It's dangerous for workers too. I want to name that there was a worker who died. There's also been a worker who was, you know, submerged for hours in freezing cold water. So moving ahead in this really fast way, which is really just a tactic to try to complete as much construction as possible before court agreements are heard, is dangerous to workers too. And so politically, politicians are framing this always as jobs versus environment, which I think is completely socially irresponsible. And we should really be critiquing, you know, that why are the only good paying jobs that are available to rural Minnesotans these like extractive industries like pipeline construction, mining? You know, I think that takes a toll on, you know, we are Earth, right? We know this, like, and so to have jobs where your job is to dig into the earth, whether on a conscious level you realize it or not, like that harms your soul and your spirit. And so I think, and you know, like that was the other thing, right? It was all about jobs for Minnesotans and good union jobs. But really, if you look at the numbers, Enbridge is not delivering on that promise at all. And I think the last report that I looked at was maybe from a month ago, but they were estimating in terms of hours worked that only like 28% of the hours were going to local jobs. And all of the local work is short-term anyway. So it's such a ridiculous argument that this is good for rural communities. It's not. So I said I would show a picture of the tar sands. This is what that level of extraction looks like to the land. And again, keeping in mind that like there are Indigenous communities that live surrounded by this. So their ways of life have been completely impacted by this industry and by this corporate greed. Another picture I think is important to see is this is actually what it is. When we talk about tar sands, it's this crude oil that then needs to be diluted with a bunch of other chemicals to send it through these pipelines. And so what ends up happening, so Enbridge has a very large track record of spills, and just because they're building a new pipeline, new doesn't equal more safe. You can still rupture a new pipeline if you're, you know, attempting to push all the oil that they're attempting to push through. But these are just some histories of spills that have happened. So in Marshall, Michigan, as well as in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, we just passed the 30th anniversary of this spill, which happened when the rivers were still frozen. So luckily it was a little bit easier to clean up. But the threat, I mean, we know all pipelines spill. So this is like, the fact that this pipeline crosses 227 bodies of water is just, I mean, of course we can imagine what will happen, and that's why we're fighting this. The other thing, these graphics to just kind of show like, so what actually happens when that oil, the crude stuff mixed with the chemicals like comes into contact with water. The problem is a lot of it will actually sink to the bottom of a river. So even though like with the Kalamazoo River spill in 2010, Enbridge spent billions of dollars cleaning up that oil spill, but there's only so much that you can clean up, right? Like it separates. So there's maybe something that you can clean off of the top. Fumes are going to go into the air, and then a lot of it will sink to the bottom. And so these spills like irreversibly change ecosystems. And here's just kind of another graphic demonstrating that. It's kind of separation that happens. I guess another thing I want to mention too is there's no plans to clean up the old line. So I think in terms of what the people could be demanding that would actually create jobs for people is to clean up the old line and all of these pipelines. People should be trained in pipeline removal and cleaning up. There's definitely, yeah, if it's really about jobs, right, that could be a job that could be created for people. But as of right now, there's no plans to clean up the old line 3. It's running at half capacity right now with a bunch of different structural anomalies. Yeah. And this is just a map of all these are only the oil pipelines. So there's more like natural gas pipelines and things like that. But just to see the kind of bigger picture scale of everything coming out of the tar sands. And again, these pipelines are always crossing through, land that is native land. It's indigenous lands and indigenous communities that are the most impacted by these pipelines. And so, yeah, just wanted to kind of show the bigger picture of what this greed looks like. And yeah, just once again, making that connection with all these pipelines near indigenous communities, all these predominantly male workers coming in, that increase in phenomenon of missing and murdered indigenous relatives is very connected to pipeline construction. And we're seeing that in Minnesota. A few weeks ago, a couple of pipeline workers were arrested in a human trafficking sting. So Native women have been warning about this and, been advocating about this, and it happened. So it's very real. And I think these are just a couple of photos of kind of the divestment protests that are happening right now. So Chase Bank is #1 funder of fossil fuels. And you can check out about just other banks to be divesting from at stopthemoneypipeline.org. But lots of protests happening in front of banks to demand that they stop funding Line 3 and tar sands industry. These are some photos of more water protectors locking down and blockading construction. There's lots of tactics, but direct action is definitely the one that is most effective in upping Enbridge's bill. They're over budget by I think maybe $1 billion at this point. I think the other thing that kind of causes them to go over budget with this too is that Enbridge is paying the police force. And that's something that I think came out of the Public Utilities Commission, a sort of lesson learned from Standing Rock. But that should be incredibly concerning, the fact that Enbridge is paying for the policing of this pipeline. And so again, those are the kind of resources, folks to follow. This Resist Line 3 document at the top kind of has a bunch of different links. So if you have a chance to just put that in your browser, it'll direct you to lots of different places where you can get involved. And I'm gonna stop share now and say thank you for letting me speak. There's so much more to say about it, but I hope I gave enough of an overview for folks who are kind of just learning more about it. Thank you.
So much. I have one question here. I'm sorry, there might be more, but we're wanting to also move on. But my one question was, why didn't the corporation build their pipelines across Canada? And did people in Canada resist and refuse? And I don't know if anyone knows that, or you, Lorenzo, why these pipelines are all going through the US and not as much in Canada, even though it's a Canadian corporation.
I personally don't know the answer to that question. I would imagine that there is resistance, and I mean, Canada is not that different from the US in terms of colonization and just mistreatment of Indigenous people. But I personally don't know the answer to that question.
I think Superior Terminal was the closest export terminal, and they were trying. They actually they used a Line 3 previous permit to allow them to make this line, and so they actually sort of went around this necessary permitting process for a cross nation to nation pipeline, saying that they were using the same corridor that was already accepted, and they're just kind of doing this replacement project, and so they kind of like didn't use what would already, but what I don't know, they used that to get that permit, and then the Superior is the closest terminal, and so and there's been resistance since contact. So it's always like this, since settlers landed here, Indigenous people have been resisting. So like, yeah, if you watch that video, you can hear people talking about the resistance they were doing. This was 2014, talking about what's going on around Fort McMurray, around the Alberta tar sands, and right now too, there's groups doing resistance against fossil fuel infrastructure in Canada that's happening currently in this moment, like the Braided Warriors, the Tiny House Warriors. A lot of groups have set up little camps in a way of different fossil fuel extraction projects that are going through people's territories. So that's I'd say it's like it's ongoing. People resisted, people are resisting, and people have always resisted. And yeah, just like look, listen. Okay.
Thank you. I will let people know that this again is being recorded. You will be able to watch this presentation again if you'd like and catch it again. It will be you'll be able to see it on YouTube and Facebook. So thank you so much. That's a great presentation, and it really gives some background to Line 3. And to round off our conversation on militarization of the police at Line 3 and in Minneapolis is Emma Sron. She currently co-chairs the WAMM Board of Directors. She's been an anti-war and social justice activist since she first protested the war in Iraq in high school in Chicago. She's an independent professional journalist and photographer. Her articles have been featured in Mint Press News, The Anti-Media, Zero Hedge, The Mind Unleashed, Media Roots, We Are Change, and more. She's been present and working, often accompanied by her 2 children, at Standing Rock, Line 3, and protests related to the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Doe and Lorenzo. You both had amazing presentations. I just want to make sure that people are in everything that you're learning right now about Line 3 from Doe and the fight against Line 3 and what's happening and why people are fighting against it, to look at what happened at Standing Rock and realize that there's potential for the police response to boil over into something like that. And we need to know that that's possible, and we need to be ready to do whatever we can to prevent it, stop it, put our bodies on the line also. We can't just look at Standing Rock and know that it happened. We need to learn from that and use that lens as we look at Line 3 and what's happening there. Line 3, the construction started just a few months ago, which is the winter. And I wonder if there was some purposefulness to the timing there to prevent a massive crowd of people to converge there, like happened at Standing Rock. It's hard for people to put their bodies on the line and camp out in the winter. There's a lot of people that have been doing that, and they've been doing an amazing job, but that prevents some people from going up and doing that too. So there's been a lot less people there than we saw when a lot of us first heard about Standing Rock. I would like to try to tie all of these things in together. I am on the End Domestic Militarism Committee here at WAMM, and it's a newer committee that I know Diane gave some information about at the beginning. We've learned a lot from seeing what happened at Standing Rock and from what has happened here in the Twin Cities over the summer about the increase in domestic militarism. And a lot of people maybe don't see all of it happening in all of these different places. They might have seen what happened at Standing Rock. They might have seen just what happens in Minneapolis or what's happening downtown, or they're not in Minnesota and they see what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now. And I don't think that we should be looking at these things as isolated incidences. We need to look at the big picture of what's happening here, and kind of connect everything. So that's kind of what I'm going to try to do here. I'm going to share my screen with you and just have some photos going and a little slideshow. If I can get a thumbs up if you guys can see this. Cool. So I'm going to start out, this is a timeline here. This is in Mandan, what it looked like when water protectors on Thanksgiving were just sort of having a little Thanksgiving meal as a protest. And quickly, these guys moved in, and it's intense and it's overwhelming to be presented with this as just a human with food or signs and regular clothing on, to have this come up at you very forcefully and suddenly, and push back people and what's going on. And I actually just kind of walked into this as this part was happening. And so I snapped a few pictures, but you can see there's a lot of them. And then I have some pictures here of what it looked like at Standing Rock, to, I guess, add on to what Lorenzo was already able to show you. There's barricades, there's Bearcats, there's buses, there's these lights, barbed wire, which we're now seeing in Minneapolis and at the United States Capitol right now. It's wild to see something like this in person, and it was very interesting, kind of emotionally, to see the footage that you were showing, Lorenzo, because there's so much has happened in a short amount of time that I don't think a lot of us, even people who haven't like seen this stuff in person with their own eyes, even consuming this, like watching live streams and knowing that this has happened, I think a lot of us have not actually had the time to process mentally and emotionally, because it just keeps coming. This is it really intense how quickly these things are happening and how we're just kind of being bombarded with it. So going back to get some of these pictures and looking at what Lorenzo showed us was interesting for me. So you can see up here, there's police and vehicles and lights. There's water protectors down on the bottom. There's barbed wire everywhere. It was just, it was surrounded. It was occupation. These lights were on. It's hard to explain how it felt to not have seen anything like that before and then suddenly be around it. And then the next thing that happened, what I have photos here of, is the Super Bowl. When the Super Bowl was in Minneapolis, apparently we needed to be extra protected because there was some sort of a risk, something worth occupation. And I know in one of the videos that Lorenzo showed, the narrator talked about there not being evidence in a press conference, that they say that they need to do things, but don't provide evidence. And that's something that a lot of us watching this right now knows happens overseas and around the world to justify bombing, to justify occupation, to justify troops on the ground, to justify sanctions. There's often not very clear evidence presented, and that's happening here now too. And we know how propaganda in the media works, that if you're told something that's untrue 20 times, and you're told something that's true once, because that's harder to get out in the media, people tend to believe the untrue thing because of repetition. So if they keep saying that there's this evidence, but never show it to us, it doesn't necessarily matter that they never had the evidence, because they're just repeating the fact that this thing is what it is. And then people tend to eat up the reason for it. They're like, oh, okay, it looks like we need the National Guard here. So the Super Bowl had militarized vehicles in it. downtown was occupied. And a lot of these people, it was Minneapolis police, it was the Hennepin County Sheriff, it was the National Guard. A lot of these people and a lot of these vehicles were the very same things that were up at Standing Rock. And that was personally really wild for me to see this and to know that it was the same people that I just saw in that other situation. But here, people were walking through downtown and taking selfies with them, with these armed officers and next to the vehicles. And all I could think was that we don't want to normalize this. We don't need this here for the Super Bowl, but all this is doing is normalizing to people that we can activate the National Guard or we need armed security. And what a slippery slope that can be into accepting being occupied to keep us safe without evidence. It was just so disappointing to see people happy about this and taking photos of themselves with these people in these vehicles. And they were posing for pictures for me too. It was very, very wild. I happened to stumble upon like one of the staging areas too for where they were doing this at the state fairgrounds. They had set up all these white tents that were just filled with all kinds of army vehicles and militarized police vehicles. And then fast forward here to the summer. I'm sure everybody that's watching this is well aware of what happened over the summer and how quickly the police were to pull out all of this gear that they have, all of their riot gear, all of these large like vehicles and weapons and all kinds of things and use them on people. And here are photos of children and families just coming out to the protest to see what's going on. And seconds later, tear gas is deployed with no care for who is around and that there might be children getting caught up in this. And this is an interesting photo to me to see. This person here is, it's summer, it's hot, they're only wearing shorts and they have a piece of chalk in their hand because they were writing on the ground with chalk, and then the police line behind them with batons and gas masks and helmets. And even over the course of the summer, we saw an increase in the militarization of police. Like this, looking back at these photos, these police, even though they are threatening, look less threatening to me now than what I'm used to seeing more recently, because they don't have the big like shin leg guard things that a lot of them wear now. That it's very quick how the militarization and the use of all of their equipment is increasing even over the course of the summer. And I just have really endless photos of what all of this was like throughout the summer, and how here it moved into the neighborhoods too. They would push people into where people live and deploy tear gas. There's families in their homes with their windows open and people's cars parked on the street and they're firing things at people. This was I believe the first night of the curfew. I drove around that night because press was supposed to be exempt, and I live near the state capitol, so I drove down there and wasn't expecting this and drove upon the scene of the capitol surrounded in the middle of the night, and you can see vehicles up there on the steps, and I was just taken aback at like this is minutes from where I live. This is the state capitol that I've protested on these steps so many times. I've visited here, I've taken my kids here, and this is what occupation looks like. This is not okay. So I did my best to take photos of this for moments like this, so people can see if they didn't get to see this with their own eyes. But then over the next few days, the Capitol was still surrounded, and as protests happened at the Capitol, these vehicles were there. People had to pass through what felt like checkpoints, even though they didn't check people. It was just this occupation. And then we got to a point where all the police stations started becoming really fortified with, in this example, it was barricades, and it was a haphazard way, but you can see there's heads up over that wall of where there's National Guard and police hiding behind these barricades when there's peaceful protesters on the other side. And then we graduated, I guess, to whatever this wall was that happened around the police station downtown with barbed wire up at the top. And at the same time this was happening here, it was happening in other places too, and in different levels, and it looked differently, but it wasn't just here, and it was in our nation's capital. This was one night that something happened downtown, and because it got chaotic, the governor very quickly called in the National Guard, just instantly. That's become normalized by our local government too, that if there's a fear that things are going to get too intense, just to call in the National Guard, as opposed to fixing some of the things that might be causing these problems. We just call in the National Guard now, and how that keeps happening, and we can't accept that as normal, because where does that end? And here, this is Washington, D.C. too, just as an example of what this looks like in other places. This was the night before Election Day, when they were putting up these fences around every building downtown. There was crews working through the night to put up fences and these concrete barricades around everything, really. It was even hard to see the White House. You can't even get close to the White House anymore. And then more militarized police back here. I'm gonna go forward a little bit. Here's some pictures from line 3 and some of the response that we've seen there. And I wanted to give this example. I was up there when some legislators were visiting for tours of the situation and to learn more about what's happening there. And the last time I had been here, this brown fence wasn't there, and you could see the drill pad. The Mississippi River is right behind where I'm standing in this photo, just down a short hill. And because this fence was there, the group of legislators and other people thought, like, let's just walk up to it so we can look through it and see what's on the other side. I think that when I took this photo, I was standing on the road. So the road to this fence is a very short distance, but very, very quickly, some conservation officers showed up because we were not standing on the road, and he insisted that everybody step back, that it's okay for us to be there only if we're on the road, though. And how absurd that was, and how eye-opening it was for lawmakers to see that not that they should have a different experience, that they should have any extra privilege here, but that they were also not allowed to stand on this little bit of street just to look and see what was happening there. And then I have some pictures of what downtown Minneapolis looks like right now. Multiple layers of fencing, all kinds of different fencing. The government center surrounded. The National Guard is there. And then I'll end on a picture of the nation's capital surrounded by barricades and a fence and barbed wire also. And I think I'm kind of at the end of my time, even though I had other stuff to talk about. But I'll just take a couple more minutes to talk about how this happens. Let me actually share my screen one more time. I'll add these links later to some articles that I was going to show you. But the biggest thing is that police get this equipment through the Department of Defense program, the 1033 program. They get old military equipment. basically for free. I think they have to pay shipping to get it, and they can get as much as they want to. And it's increased dramatically more recently how much they have received. And I think that this article, the value of shipments to Minnesota law enforcement agencies has increased significantly in the past decade. Before 2010, police departments and sheriff's offices across the state received no more than $232,000 worth of equipment in a year. The annual total climbed to an all-time high in 2016 of $11.3 million, which is a massive increase. And you can see here at themarshallproject.org, you can see exactly what different police departments and like county police and everything have received in the total dollar amount here. And then you can open it up and see like exactly what they've gotten, like armored trucks and rifles and a grenade launcher and all kinds of things that you don't think these people, these police forces in your neighborhoods need. And in fact, this article also mentions how some of these towns are so small, like population, 1,242 people, got 3 robotic vehicles. That's absurd. If this is something that you're interested in stopping and you don't like the idea of police forces getting militarized equipment that can be used at places like Standing Rock, places like Line 3, downtown Minneapolis, small towns with 2,000 people, Black Alliance for Peace right now has a petition demanding that the Biden administration abolish the 1033 program. So I'll put that link in the comments, but there's a letter here that you can just add your name to. And I guess I will just end there. I hope I did an okay job trying to tie all of that together. It's a big issue. There's a lot going on, but we need to look at all of these things collectively, not on an issue by issue basis. That militarization by the US, obviously, as all of you know, has existed across the world and has been increasing, but it's also existed here in the US for a long time, but we're seeing more of it because the internet and social media and independent journalists are able to show us what's going on now, and we didn't necessarily see that before. But we need to pay attention to all of it, and we need to figure out how to stop it.
Thanks, Emma. And just to reiterate a point that was made in the chat, if you are on Zoom, you may have seen this. It's not on if you're on Facebook or YouTube. It's important to make sure that we're not sending a message. Thank you, Meredith and Ann, that it's too dangerous to protest because of the militarization of the cops. We don't want people to think that. We have safety in large numbers, and we are trying to show that large numbers were pushing back against this militarization. So we really want people to come in large numbers to the protests during the Chauvin trial. I did post a Facebook event to an event happening on Monday at 5 p.m. at the Hennepin County Government Center, sponsored by lots of groups. We have safety in numbers, and we need to show up and set the narrative as well. So I want to thank all of our speakers today. Everyone did a great job. Again, this is being recorded, and so if you'd like to watch it again or share it with people, you will be able to do that on Facebook and also on YouTube. So thank you to everyone. And I'm going to pass it to Sarah Martin. We are moving on to the business section of our WAMM annual meeting. And so
it looks like Lorenzo actually had something quick to say, if that's okay.
Yeah, I just want so it's important to track what's going on in Minneapolis right now. Like recently the police tried to move into a houseless camp in North, and it ended up in fist fights between people and a lot of police violence. And then a few days later, the police were arresting an 11-year-old, and they ended up punching him, throwing him around. But also what's important about that is the response by the police. They initiated a quick response unit. Sheriff showed up in armor and less lethal weapons within a minute, deployed a riot line, and this was it was a neighborhood, some kids, so the environment here is really heated, I feel like, and I just wanted to say that that's the way the police are responding, and I feel like that's the stance they've had. And as far as I don't think it's we're not trying to share fear, but we're trying to share information. And it's important that we're honest with each other of the situation in the streets, you know, and like, I know people who've lost limbs. I know people who've lost eyes. We don't want that to happen. We want to take care of each other and keep each other safe at all times. But, you know, if the police decide to, you know, enact ultra violence, that's what the police will do. And we just have to be aware of that situation, how to take care of each other in those situations, as well as like when things are going peaceful and great, you know, before the police attack or whatever. And so I just wanted to say that, like, it isn't fear, but it's important that we're honest that these things can be dangerous. The police are using massive force. They did take people's eyes out during the uprising. And the other thing I wanted to say too, to think about, is like, the amount of information about the January 6th attacks on the Capitol was like rampant. Like, there was so much info that shit was going to go down, that the you know, a bunch of like white supremacists and sympathizers were like grifted into like, you know, attacking the Capitol. That was all really, really obvious, and they weren't prepared at all. And now going into this trial, I don't see a lot of things tracking. There's supposed to be ultra violence, or they're going to try to take over spaces. You know, you have a lot of people saying they have like protests. A lot of the same groups that have been having peaceful protests in this city for decades, and this is how they're preparing for it. And so I just think that sort of dichotomy is really important to like think about, and like it's just strange. I feel it's really strange. I just wanted to mention it. But anyways, thank you so much. Sorry to sort of that, but just like, it's just really important. Like, things can be dangerous, and that's why so many people do a lot of work to prepare people to go in the streets and to prepare to work together. And you have street medics who be like walk, and you have all these things going on because everyone's trying their best to take care of each other so we can experience power in the streets together. And so, like, no fear, you know, have a good time. All love. That's it.
Oh, can't hear you. You muted.
It's fine. We're good.
Thanks, Lorenzo. That's great to compare kind of, the Capitol and then what's happening in Minneapolis. And important to always do that, and to make sure that the focus is on being honest and what can happen, and kind of versus the fear, but knowing that that is a reality as well. But there's safety, you know, we need to be in numbers. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Martin right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Martin, and along with Emma, I am a co-chair of the WAMM board. And anybody is certainly, now we have to do the board meeting because that's part of our deal. And anybody that wants to stay on for that and talk about budgets and that kind of thing is more than welcome to, but you don't have to. So thank you all so much for coming to this. Let's see, how many people did we have, Emma or Diane? Ultimately, we had a good group on.
We had 35 sign-ins, I believe, and some people had 2 at their camera. And don't forget that the annual song is going to be sung, and people might want to hear that.
That's true. That is worth staying on for. And Marie really does a job with numbers, so she makes it not boring. So if you want to learn how to do budget talk, stay on and listen to how Marie does that. And until Monday, I mean, I will be there on Monday at 5 o'clock, and I hope to see all of you that can, because it's as I said in the chat, the world's going to be watching, and it's and we really can. The only way to get Derek Chauvin convicted, or we are a big part of getting Derek Chauvin convicted, I think, and the public pressure. So ongoing as we have been. So see you Monday. But in the meantime, we need to do this business. So looking at my list here, just a second here. So I call this meeting to order, the 2021 WAMM annual meeting, and it's